Hello, welcome to Richmond Rising. I'm your host, Josh Imhoff, and we're here today at the Richmond Sanitary Wastewater Treatment Plant. I'm joined by Pat Smoker, the Director of Richmond Sanitary District.
Yeah,
how you doing, Pat?
Good, good.
Thanks for having us here at your wastewater treatment facility.
I always like inviting people here when I can.
Great, great. So we're here to talk about CSOs.
Okay.
What exactly is a CSO? What does that stand for?
It stands for Combined Sewer Overflow. So Richmond, like a lot of old communities, our sanitary and our storm lines are connected. And Richmond, the original sewers were built 1915, 1920 time frame, and they all originally went to the river. In the 1930s, like 1932, I believe exactly, the wastewater treatment plant, the first version of that was built here, and it was able to treat that, but it wasn't as concerned at that point about separating it because it had all been going to the river prior to that, so it was only built to treat like normal daily sanitary water, but then when you had these storm flows, it would overflow out into the river or the receiving bodies. And over time, as Richmond grew and grew, just there were more of those in place. So we're a combined sewer community.
So really, it's about separating the sewage from homes and industry, from like rainwater and rainfall from our parking lots and street gutters and that kind of stuff?
Correct. So we were placed in the early 2000s, the EPA and state governments were looking to start requiring this separation of sewers. Indiana IDEM, the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, took over kind of running the state's program, and they, community by community base, had to build a long-term control plan. So you'll hear us talk about that a lot, LTCPs or long-term control plan for our CSO separation. Our plan went into effect in 2010 and has until 2030 to be separated out based upon the requirements in our plan.
So it sounds like you've already completed quite a bit of work separating those two systems.
Correct. We are a little bit ahead of schedule on separating out at the collection system. Most of that separation work has been completed. We just recently bid out a project to upgrade 2 lift stations on Short Creek, the upper and the lower. And we received a $2 million grant, which helped to pay for that. But that's one of the last pieces of the actual collection system separation. Now, our plan did not require 100% separation. That part of the model of our plan was driven by economics. So if, and I'm just making up numbers here for illustration, but if you had to spend, $50 million to get 90% separation, and you had to spend another 50 to get that last 10%, the state would kind of weigh in, is that worth that other 50 million for that 10%, or is there, can we deal with that and come up with some solution? So although we've done most of the separation in the collection system, our last piece, since we're not fully separated, we're going to have to treat, and the plan's still kind of fluid, the state's kind of looking at end goals here, but the rough goal is we will have to still treat storm flows for the once every 10-year statistical storms 1 hour peak flow. So the treatment plant itself is designed to do a peak flow of 36 million gallons per day. Our early modeling, and we're still wrapping up some of that modeling, because as we did separation, the model changes, right? I mean, the dynamics of the collection system change. But we're looking to roughly have to treat another 60 million gallons during that storm that I kind of laid out.
Once in 10 years storm.
Once every 10-year storm. So the last piece of that long-term control plan is a high-rate treatment facility that will treat that other 60 million gallons. So we're really looking at, we should be able to treat almost all normal-sized storms. It would really have to exceed that once every 10-year size storm before we would have a CSO overflow at that point.
That's great. So right now, with your average like spring or summer storm, most of that rainwater is getting diverted away from the sanitary sewer into the river, and what isn't is getting sent here to be treated along with the sanitary lines? Yeah,
so originally Richmond had approximately 40 CSO overflow points. So in the combined system, there were 40 outfalls of the combined system that went to the Whitewater River. We are down now from the separation we have. There are only 2 in the collection system and 1 at the treatment plant. So we're treating a lot more flow. A lot more gets here to be treated than used to be. But currently, yeah, we're still limited to anything over 36 million gallons per day. If it's a storm that produces more than that, that excess of 36 has to still go out as a combined sewer overflow and goes to the river. But the end goal is by 2030 and the high rate treatment is built, we'll be able to treat. Again, the model right now is showing a total treatment through the plant with the high rate plus the regular treatment plant of around 100 million gallons per day that we could treat here.
That's great. And it seems kind of obvious why you don't want wastewater hitting the river, hitting nature before it gets treated here. But what are some of the benefits of preventing these CSOs?
Yeah, like you said, there's obviously environmental, right? I mean, nobody wants sewage in their receiving stream, but if it goes out in a CSO overflow, right, anything that could have been flushed down the toilet could end up there. So you're not just talking sewage water itself, but you can have some solids and things like that are just deleterious looking in the river. And if you had significant of that, it can create environmental effects on the river. But the river is also used recreationally. There's fishing, boating, and different things, swimming, all up and along the Whitewater River. So we want to preserve it for those pieces. But also, just like Richmond, I think it's roughly half of our drinking water gets pulled out of the Middles Fork Reservoir, which is the headwaters kind of a fork of the East Fork of the Whitewater River here. Other communities use this river for their drinking water. So the cleaner it is just the cheaper and more easy it is to clean it for drinking water purposes. So maintaining the health of the river is very important.
Great. So there are still occasionally CSO events where the overflows do occur. How is that communicated to the public? Are there any precautions people that want to fish or spend time in the river need to be aware of?
Yeah, so every time there's a CSO, the treatment plant here, the operator record of the treatment plant has to send out an email notification. That notification also notifies anybody who wants to be on that. We put out a regular notice, and you could call at any point in time and be added to that email list. But it also goes to the local media, so it is distributed out that way that there was a CSO event. And it's written that there's always advised caution for staying out of the water or for 72 hours post an event to kind of let that clear up and move down.
Yeah, so it sounds like you're doing a lot of work to mitigate, that sort of events from occurring here in Richmond.
Yes, we've done a lot of work. Like I said, reducing roughly 40 overflow points down to really 2 in the collection system itself, and that takes a lot of work. It's not as it sounds like just separating it, and doesn't sound too complicated, but it requires a lot of modeling of finding the system. We're an old community. Some of the sewers we have 300 miles of sewers. Some of that sewer is still the original 1920 brick sewer. Sewer is really designed to last about 100 years. So we've utilized the old system where we can, but it required a lot of televising to find connections where they are. As you brought up, there's a lot of parking lot just drains, but there are house gutters, just a lot of connections, basement sump pumps, things like that are really storm related, that are connected, and identifying those takes a lot of work in and of itself. But then how do you separate? That's a very complicated piece as well. A lot of people, I had the misconception even before I started in this field about 20 years ago of how sewers were kind of just like a straight line pipe, but we really only have 3 lines that come into the treatment plant here, and they really branch like big trees across all of the City of Richmond or the Sanitary District. So sometimes it's not intuitive how you would separate. Sometimes you're actually high up in the branching of this tree, you're dropping a pipe to drop it over to a new section so you can turn that downstream of that branch into a storm or a sanitary line. So it's how you pulled it off up front and capping, and trying to model that so you don't create additional overflows or pinch points. So there's a lot of modeling that goes into that. The other challenges of doing all the work is economics. Again, this long-term control plan had an economic plan behind it, so staying within that, and luckily we have. We've been very fortunate. We have a great engineering team that has allowed us to do that. We're definitely running quite a bit under what the original long-term control plan that we put out in 2010, what that anticipated. We've spent quite a bit less than what that anticipated, which is reflected in our rate from what the original rate was expected to be. But the other is just, it's an old community, a lot of residential area, trying to make that impact of construction that much smaller. So trying to come up with ways to not open cut things, but do underground boring and pipe laying like that, so that it minimizes downtime for the community or construction efforts. So all that goes into a separation ahead of time. So
what was your most recent project that helped separate those two systems?
So we just recently finished up the west side, what we like to call the west side interceptor. There were quite a bit of pieces done on that. The east side was really the section we did first. But now, like I said, we've just bid out, which we like to call the Short Creek, which is kind of like the south and southeast side of Richmond. Those two lift stations are kind of the last piece of separation.
And a lift station brings water up.
Yeah, so we are a community that has both gravity sewers, and some lift stations. Richmond's kind of a unique community, and we have some very flat areas, and then we have some of these hilly areas. So what happens then is when they try to work that underground, is sometimes the pipe gets too deep to then gravity all the way to the treatment plant. So you use a lift station literally to lift it back up to another gravity main or a force main that will then kind of bring that elevation back up so it can grade back down towards the treatment plant.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to say about CSOs here in Richmond and what the public should know about them?
I think another big piece is just compliance, right? We put up outside on all the drains. You'll see if it's a street drain or things like that, the little fish symbol that's don't dump anything here. So always be cautious of what you're dumping or what might get loose, so if you're changing your oil of your vehicle at home, be cautious that it doesn't hit the street, because now that we're separated, if it's on the street drain, it's going to go straight to a river or receiving stream.
So it won't come here to be treated first before it's
correct.
Just straight to the water.
It's correct. And there's another piece, like when you fertilize homes, try to use best management practice there, because over fertilization, if you get a rain soon after, those nutrients will also go to the river, and nutrient loadings greatly impact the river. You've probably all seen like the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, where they talk about those giant algal blooms that come, and then when they die off, they use up all the oxygen in the water, and it creates dead zones. It kills aquatic life under there. A lot of that algal bloom is related to nitrogen and phosphorus being available in the water, and a lot of that comes from runoff of fertilizers, whether it be on farms or homes and things like that. As separation occurs, that allows those nutrients then to get directly into the receiving streams and allow those algal blooms.
Great. Well, thank you, Pat, for talking to us about CSOs here in Richmond.
Yes, anytime.
All right. And stay tuned. We'll come back to talk about recycling here in Richmond.
Richmond Sanitary District curbside service in your neighborhood. Know the dings. Bag trash goes into your green rosy roller. Regular route drivers do not get out of their trucks to pick up bags and items left beside your green rosy roller. If you have larger items that do not fit in your green rosy roller, please call to schedule a special pickup, 765-983-7450. Clean, loose, unbagged recyclables go in your blue Ritchie roller. Plastic bottles and jugs, aluminum and steel cans, glass bottles and jars with lids removed. Newspaper, chipboard like cereal boxes and magazines should be placed on top of the blue Ritchie roller tied. Corrugated cardboard has the wavy layers. It must be clean, no pizza grease, folded and broken down to slide easily out of the container when picked up to be emptied by the truck. Questions on the curbside containers? Please call Debbie Tevis at 765-983-7456. Richmond Sanitary District. Our goal is to grow.
We're still here at the Richmond Sanitary District with Director Pat Smoker. Pat, we're at the wastewater treatment facility, but I understand you also collect recycling here?
Correct. So our curbside recycling program, our MRF, material recovery facility, does the sorting here at the front end of the wastewater treatment plant.
And Richmond has a robust residential recycling program.
We are a community that has been doing it for a long time. I started before some other communities. We've been running for about 25 years or so a curbside recycling program.
And what sort of materials are accepted at curbside?
So through our program, what we can accept curbside in the blue Ritchie container, we do commingle, which is 1 and 2 plastics. It is glass jars and bottles, and that's emphasis on bottles and jars. We do aluminum and steel cans, and again, emphasis on cans there. And then you can bind paper and place on top of the Ritchie, because we will do paper. And then
like newsprint and that kind of stuff?
Newsprint, magazines, things of that nature. Chipboard, so like cereal box material. And then 2 years ago, we started up a curbside cardboard. So there's now a cardboard bin as well that comes down here, and that is corrugated cardboard, not to be confused like with the cereal boxes, which is considered chipboard. Corrugated cardboard is the cardboard that has like the wave in between the two pieces there. So.
Yeah, I'm signed up for the cardboard recycling program. I love it because I go through a bunch of diaper boxes for my kids and Amazon boxes.
Yes.
And I'm so glad that we have a special place where they get recycled instead of just thrown in the landfill now.
Yeah, I mean, what's one of the big things of recycling, right? The goal is to create a circular economy always. Resources are always limited, or just not to use them in excess, right? So being able to close that loop and recycle helps how long our resources will last. But the other piece is landfills, right? There's finite space for landfills, so being able to take things out or divert them from a landfill that you can is always a huge plus. So we're really grateful to start that. We were able to get a grant that paid for 50% of the startup of that cardboard program, so that really helped. But even now, through the original grant, we got 2,000 containers to distribute. We've distributed about half of those to date. But even through that, we've nearly doubled the residential cardboard we were able to collect in that time frame. Because prior to that, you could drop it off at the landfill. So there were a lot of people who were trying to utilize that drop box, but this was really allowed us to grow.
At the curb is just so much more convenient for people.
Yeah, and that's what we found. It's just that way, human nature on anything, right? The more convenient it is, the more we're likely to participate. So being able to make that curbside, it makes that a lot easier for us to obtain that material.
So you still have spots open in the cardboard recycling program if people want to join that?
Yes. So if you right now, again, we had 2,000 originally, and we looked at if it grows, we can always purchase more. But only about 45% of Richmond uses the blue container as well. So you can definitely sign up for both of those. You can call the Sanitary District number, the 765-983-7450, and somebody will get you set up to get those containers if you would like to have one.
Great. And it gets picked up every other week, that's correct?
It does. So when we started the cardboard, we actually sent out a survey, and everybody could kind of weigh in on what they wanted that to look like. So the blue Ritchie can for the plastics and that type of material was always every other week, and that schedule is on the Sanitary District website. But when we pulled people about the cardboard, it really only needs to be done about every other week as well, but they didn't want weeks where they set out 3 containers. So it's actually 1 week your blue Ritchie goes out, and then the off week your cardboard would go out, and trash, your green Rosie, goes out every week. But it's 1 week your blue, the next week is your cardboard, the tan one, and they just kind of rotate like that.
Right. And I know with recycling, the end goal is to get that to a facility where it can be reused and remanufactured into something.
Correct.
We don't actually do that here in Richmond, correct? We don't process the material in that way.
Correct. We are just a sorting facility. We are collection and sorting. We don't do the end process. Currently, we contract that out and have for quite a few years. Richmond's a sizable community, but in the recycling world, we don't actually produce enough of any one type of material to be a processor ourselves. So we contract with somebody else and supplement the material they get. So right now we're contracted with Rumpke. So what we do is if I get basically 20 tons of any one material, so if I had 20 tons of paper, we would call Rumpke and they would bring in a semi-trailer and we would load up our 20 tons, which is all baled in neat cubes. And then we would load it up there and they would supplement that to their papers. So they would send it to a processing facility that does paper, and they would add several more tons in of their own material to that.
Great. And so this is a collection and sorting facility. I know sorting can be labor intensive, or it can be difficult when wrong items get added to the recycling stream. Are there any things that people need to be aware of not to put in the Blue Richie containers?
Yeah, that's a big piece, contamination, right? And efficiency of being able to do this. Sorting here is, we have a line that will pull the material up, but then it's all hand sorted into bins. So that is very labor intensive. And the big piece, and it's a challenge with all recycling, is not every community does the same material. Again, our system has been around for a long time, but that means some new things that are recyclable, we can't recycle here. Our program doesn't have enough bins or sorting capacity to do that. So like 3 through 7 plastic, some communities can recycle that. We cannot. We only do the 1s and 2s. And again, that there's a kind of a do's and don'ts sheet for recycling on our website that can be pulled up under the forms and documents section. It kind of lays this out, but when I was stressing glass bottles earlier, we couldn't do like a glass fish aquarium. You know, it's just not something, the way our sorting line is and the way it comes out, it cannot handle that type of material. Metal is another one. We take the aluminum and steel cans, but larger aluminum metal, again, won't fit up this sorting line. However, we do have at the landfill, you can drop off large metal items because we can sort it there for those pieces. Again, we've created this cardboard now, and there's some requirements on breaking that down so it doesn't stick in the cans as we're trying to auto unload that. But we see a lot of other things like plastic grocery sacks. Again, can be recycled in places. We do not. We would advise most local groceries will take those sacks back. So if you do want to collect them, you can take them to like the local grocery store and they will recycle those.
Right. What about bagging your recyclable materials before putting it in the bin? I know
Correct.
Some places allow that and some places...
Yeah, we do not like that. Our system, we ask it to be unbagged in that. And just as a note, but your trash, your green rosy should be bagged, but your recyclables are not, because again, we're hand sorting these. And kind of what we do now is we dump the truck onto a floor in front of our facility, and we will kind of hand grab out the big items that we know aren't recyclable. But then it'll go up a conveyor belt. So if it was bagged, we would have to physically cut open every bag ourselves to dump it out, and then to hand sort it would have to be cut open. So that would just add another whole step. So we ask that you don't bag the stuff that goes inside the Richie, and we call it co-mingle, right? Because it's different materials mingled together. The paper that you set on top, we ask that to be bundled. Your cardboard is broke down and it's kind of held in a container. We ask that to be loose as well. But they're kind of already sorted, pre-sorted at the curb for us. But that co-mingle that we like to call, again, don't bag that because we'd have to cut that open hand by hand.
Great. And I know people are generating a lot of e-waste now, upgrading their TVs, computers, cell phones with those batteries. Can that be recycled or accepted here?
It can. I mean, I think our preference would be always a lot of like electronic stores in town. I'll name like a Best Buy. Some of them will take these materials back and they have reuse programs for that. We do accept it at our landfill, and we contract out with a company that will then take that and they distribute that out for a cost for us. But if local places have uses for it, that would be the better place. But we do accept e-waste at our landfill.
Right. Is there anything else about the recycling program you think people should be more aware of?
I think following these pieces that the do's and don'ts and looking at the website and signing up are all great pieces. We are aware that the EPA recently put out a new strategy guide for how they want to grow recycling. And really a bigger portion of that is landfill diversion on the overall. And they're looking at lots of material, but I think their national statistics say that 50% of what's going in landfills now could be diverted. Not all of that is as you think of plastics, but some of that's like construction and demolition waste, so like shingles and drywall. And as they've put that out, we're actively looking for grants to help upgrade our program. Again, it's 25 years old. but we want to start being proactive because we assume that the EPA strategy and guidelines eventually will become mandates. So it's how do we purchase equipment now that will allow us to be able to grow these other landfill diversion strategies. We've talked about how labor intensive that is. Really right now, the last couple years, we've seen a big wave of technology growth in this. They're really putting out a combination of AI, which really it's growing. It can look at that conveyor that's running down and it starts to go, oh, that crumpled piece of this is a number 1 plastic, that crumpled is a number 2. And it can see that, and then it passes it on a robot. They kind of work in tandem, and the robot then will go, it knows what to grab and pre-sort it for you. Right now that isn't scaled to a level for the size of community we are. It's really designed for really large facilities, but we're hoping in the next handful of years that scales down and we can employ some of that here and be able to really grow this without adding all that infrastructure and labor that it would be required to do that work. So we're really hopeful that, and we've talked about landfill diversion. Richmond is one of the last municipal landfills kind of in the state of Indiana, and we're very fortunate to have even if it wasn't municipal, that it's local, right, drives the cost down for trash collection. If you have to drive further away, there's that extra drive cost that's associated with that. So the longer we can extend the life of our own landfill, the cheaper we can keep costs for Richmond residents for solid waste collection. Right now there's 35 to 50 years available in our landfill, but if in 5-10 years we could get to that 50% diversion, now we may be looking at 70 to 100 years, and that would be just
the more we can recycle, the longer we can put off actually growing the landfill and building new cells and purchasing new land.
Yeah, so just even in purchasing new cells in the existing space we have at the landfill, but then if we had to acquire more property, or if we couldn't acquire property, have to ship that longer distances, the next closest landfills are roughly 50, 60 miles away, in some ballpark like that. So again, trying to maximize those spaces.
Pat, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure here at Richmond Sanitary District. And this has been Richmond Rising with Josh Imhoff.